The rhythmic pulse of drums fills the narrow cobblestone streets of Salvador, Brazil. A percussion orchestra echoes through the air, the deep thrum of the surdos and the bright metallic clatter of agogos blending into a sound that feels both ancient and alive. In the midst of it all walks French President Emmanuel Macron, surrounded by dancers, musicians and officials. His white shirt glints in the tropical sun as he pauses to listen, smiling, tapping his fingers against the rhythm. This is Salvador de Bahia, a city where Africa and Brazil meet in spirit and memory. It was here, centuries ago, that the first slave market in the New World was held, and it is here, now, that France's president is calling for a reimagined relationship between continents, one that moves beyond the weight of history and towards something new. Macron's visit coincides with COP30, the 30th United Nations Climate Change Conference, but this moment on these streets is about more than carbon targets or policy frameworks. It's about heritage, reconciliation, and the human stories that connect Europe, Africa, and Latin America. As the procession moves through the historic Pelourinho district, the president stops beside a young capoeirista twirling in a circle of music. Macron takes the berimbau, the one-stringed bow that anchors capoeira's rhythm, and strikes it gently. The crowd cheers. The gesture is small but symbolic, a French leader touching the sound of Afro-Brazilian resistance. Walking alongside him are Salvador's Mayor Bruno Reis, Bahia's Governor Geronimo Rodrigues, and Brazil's Minister of Culture, Margareth Menezes, all figures rooted in the cultural and political revival of this region. Cameras follow them as they pass pastel-coloured colonial facades, children wave flags. One moment catches attention. Macron, bending down, lifts a baby from a mother's arms, holding the child high against the sunlight. It is an image that will circle the world, the French president, smiling, cradling a symbol of future generations in a city once defined by loss. Later, the crowd gathers inside the theatre hosting Notre Futur, Brazil-France Dialogues with Africa, a new cultural festival sponsored jointly by France and Brazil. The stage is alive with colour. Behind Macron, banners ripple with 3 words: Europe, Brazil, Africa. He takes the podium. His first words are simple, yet they carry the full weight of history. And this triangle, which was once a triangle of pain, exploitation, a root of shame, he says, we are now turning into a triangle of love through this forum and through the work of our cultural institutions and artists. The audience breaks into applause, the kind that feels both emotional and political. The triangle of pain Macron refers to is the old transatlantic route, the triangular trade that for centuries tied Europe, Africa, and the Americas through slavery and colonialism. By calling it now a triangle of love, he is challenging Europe to reimagine its place in the world, not as a former master, but as a partner in shared creation. It's a phrase that instantly becomes headline material. Macron calls for a triangle of love, but beyond the soundbite lies a deeper call to action, a message about identity, memory, and the power of cultural diplomacy in a divided world. In Salvador, this message carries particular resonance. The city is more than just a postcard of beaches and carnival. It's a living archive of African heritage in the Americas. From the rhythms of samba reggae to the sacred rites of candomblé, every corner speaks of the resilience of people who remade suffering into art. Macron's presence here is both symbolic and strategic, a gesture toward Latin America at a moment when Europe is seeking new global partnerships amid shifting geopolitics. France, under Macron's leadership, has positioned itself as a bridge between North and South, East and West, rich and developing nations. Yet, such aspirations often clash with historical legacies. Standing in Salvador, Macron attempts to bridge that divide not through trade agreements or defence treaties, but through culture and emotion. He continues, I want to invite you to invent a future that embraces identities without confrontation, he says. That looks again at these Black Madonnas, this ability to creolize languages, and says, The future is ours if we know how to look at these paths as they were. I have high hopes for your work. His words evoke the very essence of creolization, the blending of languages, faiths, and histories. By invoking the image of the Black Madonna, Macron references both African spirituality and European iconography, merging them into a vision of shared humanity. For the young artists and students in the audience, many of whom trace their ancestry to both Africa and the Americas, this is a moment of validation. It's not just a political speech, it's a recognition that culture, not capital, may yet define the new global order. The camera pans across the crowd, musicians, scholars, local leaders, all nodding as Macron speaks. On stage beside him are Governor Rodriguez, Minister Menezes, Mayor Reis, and Olusegun Bakari, the Beninese Minister of Foreign Affairs and Cooperation. Together, they embody the triangle Macron describes: France from Europe, Benin from Africa, and Brazil from the Americas. When the governor of Bahia takes the microphone, he praises the partnership as a gesture of trust and respect. The Brazilian Minister of Culture, Margareth Menezes, speaks passionately about cultural reparation, the idea that healing can emerge through art, music, and dialogue. From the side of the stage, Macron listens, occasionally nodding, occasionally smiling, a diplomat's composure, softened by the warmth of the Brazilian crowd. When it's his turn again, he leans forward and delivers his closing lines, measured yet heartfelt. I want to express my deep trust and thank all the youth coming from mainland France, from our overseas territories, from the African continent, from Benin and neighboring countries, and from Brazil, he says. It is through your dialogues, your demands, your capacity for innovation that you will build a better possible future and make this world more livable. There's a pause long enough for the translator to finish before he adds the final note. That is the only valid response, not withdrawal, but dialogue, innovation, invention, respecting each voice. In that moment, the audience rises. Some applaud, others simply stand still, absorbing the significance. The words echo across the hall, not withdrawal, but dialogue. Outside, the tropical evening settles over Salvador. The sound of the drums returns, mingling with laughter and music from nearby streets. Macron steps back into the open square, where the crowd surges forward for handshakes and photos. Around him are artists draped in vibrant fabrics, capoeiristas spinning in midair, and children holding flags of Brazil, France, and Benin. To many watching, the symbolism is unmistakable. The French leader, once criticized for Europe's paternal tone toward Africa, is now trying to reshape that narrative. His triangle of love is not merely poetic, it is strategic, a declaration that Europe's future lies in partnership with the global South. Analysts note that Macron's trip to Brazil is part of a broader effort to rekindle Europe's influence in Latin America, especially as China's presence deepens across the region. By speaking in Salvador, a city whose cultural DNA fuses African and Brazilian roots, Macron taps into the emotional core of transatlantic history. In France, reactions to his speech are mixed. Supporters hail it as visionary, aligning with his push for strategic autonomy, a Europe independent yet globally engaged. Critics, however, call it overly symbolic, questioning whether love and art can offset hard power and trade imbalances. But in Salvador that day, politics gives way to poetry. The French president dances briefly with capoeira performers. He greets artisans selling beaded jewelry. He shares a quiet word with a historian about the slave routes that once tied Bordeaux to Bahia. The tone is human, almost intimate, a side of diplomacy rarely seen in marble halls. Later, as the delegation departs, Macron looks out toward the Atlantic. Somewhere across that ocean lies Senegal, Benin, Ghana, nations once bound to this very shore through chains and ships. Now, centuries later, a French president speaks of love instead of loss. The voiceover would linger here, reflecting on the weight of such transformation. Europe, born from empire, confronting its own conscience in the heart of the diaspora. Brazil, still wrestling with racial inequality, offering its music and memory as bridges. And Africa, vibrant, assertive, demanding recognition not as a continent of the past, but of the future. Macron's triangle of love is an attempt to draw these lines together, not through nostalgia, but through cooperation, cultural exchange programs, green investment partnerships, youth innovation platforms linking Paris, Cotonou and Salvador. At COP30, these ideals extend into climate diplomacy. France and Brazil jointly announced plans for reforestation aid in the Amazon and new funding for sustainable art and heritage restoration. Macron links these initiatives to his Salvador speech, arguing that ecological repair and historical repair must go hand in hand. To heal the planet, he says later in private remarks, we must first heal our relationships. The longer one listens to the echoes of that day, the clearer it becomes that Macron's vision, however ambitious, seeks to redefine Europe's emotional geography. No longer just east-west between Washington and Moscow, but southward across the Atlantic's warmer currents toward Africa and Latin America. The camera fades on a final image. Macron walking down the pier at dusk, the Bahian sky glowing orange, the sound of waves carrying the faint rhythm of drums. In the background, young Brazilians unfurl a banner painted with 3 intertwined hearts, one red, one green, one blue. It reads, Notre Futur, nos racines communes, our future, our shared roots. The music swells, soft at first, then rising as if echoing his words. The voiceover closes gently from the coast of Salvador, where the past once cast shadows over the Atlantic. Emmanuel Macron calls for a new light, one born not of dominance, but of dialogue, not of guilt, but of grace. His triangle of love may be aspirational, but in a world fractured by fear and rivalry, it is also an invitation to imagine connection as an act of courage. And as the drums fade into the night, the idea remains that even across centuries of pain, nations can learn to speak again in rhythm, in respect, and perhaps in love.
Et au fond, on retrouve ici la France, l'Europe, le Brésil, l'Afrique. 2 phrases par 2 phrases. Je voulais remercier aussi...
D'Europe et de Brésil ensemble, nous réfléchirons sur une cité inclusive et durable.
Boa noite a todos e a todas, e em especial aos jovens.
Et à tout le Brésil, son amour pour cette terre avec laquelle nous...
Confortáveis de ver 2 países da dimensão da França e do Brasil.
Aquele que contribuiu para apresentar ao mundo a nossa história, de África, do Brasil, da Bahia e de França.
I want to invite you to invent a future that embraces identities without confrontation, that looks again at these Black Madonnas, this ability to creolize languages, and says the future is ours if we know how to look at these paths as they were. I have high hopes for your work. I want to express my deep trust and thank all the youth coming from mainland France, our overseas territories, the African continent, Benin and neighbouring countries, and Brazil.
It is through your dialogues, your demands,
your
vierges noires, cette
capacity for
capacité à
innovation,
créoliser les
that you will
langages,
build a better
et qui se dit
possible
l'avenir est à nous
future
si on sait
and make
regarder
this world more
ces
livable.
routes telles qu'elles ont été. Et moi, j'attends beaucoup de vos travaux. Et l'avenir,
That is the
de très
only
bons travaux,
valid
mais je veux vous
response,
dire vraiment
not withdrawal, but
mon immense
dialogue,
confiance.
innovation, invention,
Et remercier
respecting
ici
each
toute la
voice.
jeunesse qui vient de la France hexagonale comme de nos territoires ultramarins, qui vient du continent africain, du Bénin et de tous les pays voisins et qui vient du Brésil. C'est par vos dialogues, votre exigence, votre capacité d'innovation que vous bâtirez ce futur meilleur, ce futur possible et que vous rendrez cette terre un peu plus habitable. Et c'est la seule réponse qui vaut. Pas le repli, mais le dialogue, l'innovation, l'invention, en respectant chacune de ces paroles.